about our culture. Hit him harder. I slapped Maurice back. Harder. I slapped him again. Near his shoulder, now down lower. Murray, dressed in pajamas but bottoms, lay in bed on his side, his head flush against the pillow, his mouth open. The physical therapist was showing me how to bang loose the poison in his lungs, which he needed done regularly now, to keep it from solidifying, to keep him breathing. I always knew you wanted to hit me, Murray gasped. Yeah, I joked as I wrapped my fist against the alabaster skin of his back. This is for that B you gave me sophomore year, Whack. We all laughed, a nervous laughter that comes when the devil is within earshot. A nervous laughter that comes when the devil is within earshot. It would have been cute, this little scene, were it not what we all knew it was. The final calisthenics before death. Murray's disease was now dangerously close to his surrender spot, his lungs. He had been predicting he'd die from choking, and I couldn't imagine a more terrible way to go. Sometimes he would close his eyes and try to draw the air up into his mouth and nostrils, and it seemed as if he were trying to lift an anchor. Outside, it was jacket weather, early October. The leaves clumped in piles on the lawns around West Newton. Maurice's physical therapist had come earlier in the day, and I usually excused myself when nurses or specialists had business with him. But as the weeks passed and our time ran down, I was increasingly less self-conscious about the physical embarrassment. I wanted to be there. I wanted to observe everything. This was not like me, but then neither were a lot of things that had happened these last few months in Murray's house. So I watched the therapist work on Murray in the bed, pounding the back of his ribs, asking if he could feel the congestion loosening within him. And when she took a break, she asked if I wanted to try it. I said yes. Murray, his face on the pillow, gave a little smile. Not too hard, he said. I'm an old man. I drummed on his back and sides, moving around as she instructed. I hated the idea of Murray lying in bed under any circumstances. His last aphorism, when you're in bed, you're dead, rang in my ears. And curled on his side, he was so small, so withered. It was more a boy's body than a man's. It was more a boy's body than a man's. I saw the paleness of his skin, the stray white hairs, the way his arm hung limp and helpless. I thought about how much time we spent trying to shape our bodies, lifting weights, crunching sit-ups, and in the end, nature takes it away from us anyhow. Beneath my fingers, I felt to loose flesh around Murray's bones, and I thumped him hard, as instructed. The truth is, I was pounding on his back when I wanted to be hitting the walls. Mitch? Murray gasped. His voice jumpy as a jackhammer I pounded on him. When did I give you a B? Murray believed in the inherent good of people, but he also saw what they could become. People are only mean when they are threatened, he said later that day, and that's what our culture does. That's what our economy does. Even people who have jobs in our economy are threatened because they worry about losing them. And when you get threatened, you start looking out only for yourself. You start making money. Oh God, it is all part of its culture, part of this culture. He exhaled, which is why I don't buy into it. I nodded at him and squeezed his hand. We held hands regularly now. This was another change for me. Things that before would have made me things that before would have made me embarrassed or squeamish were now readily handled. The catch turned back, connected to the tube inside him, and filled with greenish water fluid, lay by my foot near the leg of his chair. A few months earlier, it might have disgusted me. It was inconsequential now. So was the smell of the room after Murray had used the commode. So was the smell of the room after Murray had used the commode. He didn't have the luxury of moving from place to place, of closing a bathroom door behind him, spraying some air fresher when he left. There was his bed, there was his chair, and that was his life. If my life were squeezed into such a thimble, I doubt I could make it smell any better. Here's what I mean by building your own little subculture, Murray said. I don't mean you disregard every rule of your community. I don't go around naked. For example, I don't run through red lights. The little things I can obey. But the big things, how we think, what we value, those you must choose yourself. You can't let anyone or any society determine those for you. Take my condition, the things I'm supposed to be embarrassed about now, not being able to walk, not being able to wipe my ass, waking up some mornings wanting to cry. There is nothing innately embarrassing or shaming about them. It's the same for women not being thin enough or men not being rich enough. It's just what our culture would have you believe. Don't believe it. I asked Murray why he hadn't moved somewhere else when he was younger. Where? I don't know. South America, New Guinea, someplace not as selfish as America. Every society has its own problems, Murray said, lifting his eyebrows. The closest he could come to a shrug. The way to do it, I think, isn't to run away. You have to work at creating your own culture. Look, no matter where you live, the biggest defect we human beings have is our short-sightedness. We don't see what we could be. We should be looking at our potentials, stretching ourselves into everything we can become. But if you're surrounded by people who say, I want mine now, you end up with a few people with everything and a military to keep the poor ones from rising up and stealing it. Murray looked over my shoulder to the far window. Sometimes you could hear a passing truck or a whip of the wind. He gazed for a moment at his neighbors' houses, then continued, The problem, Mitch, is that we don't believe we are as much alike as we are. Whites and black. We don't believe we are as much alike as we are. Whites and blacks, Catholics and Protestants, men and women. If we saw each other as more alike, we might be very eager to join in one big human family in this world. To care about that family the way we care about our own. But believe me, when you are dying, you see it is true. We all have the same beginning, birth, and we all have the same end, death. So how different can we be? Invest in the human family. Invest in people. Build a little community of those you love and who love you. Who love you. He squeezed my hand gently. I squeezed back harder. And like that carnival contest where you bang a hammer and watch the disc rise up the pole, I could almost see my body rise up Murray's chest and neck into his cheeks and eyes. He smiled. In the beginning of life, when we are infants, we need others to survive, right? And at the end of life, when you get like me, you need others to survive, right? His voice dropped to a whisper. But there's the secret in between. We need others as well. Later that afternoon, Cody and I went into the bedroom to watch the O.J. Simpson verdict. It was a tense scene as the principals all turned to face the jury. Simpson, in his flushed suit, surrounded by his small army of lawyers. The prosecutors who wanted him behind bars just a few feet away. When the foreman read the verdict, not guilty, Connie shrieked, "Oh my God." We watched as Simpson hugged his lawyer. We listened as the commentators tried to explain what it all meant. We saw crowds of blacks celebrating in the streets outside the courthouse. The crowds of whites sitting stunned inside restaurants. The decision was being hailed as momentous, even though murders take place every day. Connie went out in the hall. She had seen enough. I heard the door to Murray's study close. I stared at the TV set. Everyone in the world is watching this thing, I told myself. Then from the other room, I heard the ruffling of Murray's being lifted from his chair, and I smiled. As the trial of the century reached its dramatic conclusion, my old professor was sitting on the toilet. It is 1979. A basketball game in the Brandy's gym. The team is doing well, and the student section begins a chant. We are number one. We are number one. Murray is sitting nearby. He is puzzled by the cheer. At one point, in the midst of "We are number one," he rises and yells, "What's wrong with being number two?" The students look at him. They stop chanting. He sits down, smiling and triumphant. The audiovisual part 3. The Nightline crew came back for its third and final visit. The whole tenor of the thing was different now. Less like an interview, more like a sad farewell. Ted Koppel had called several times before coming up, and he asked Murray, "Do you think you can handle it?" Murray wasn't sure he could. I'm tired all the time now, Ted, and I'm choking a lot. If I can't say something, will you say it for me? Koppel said sure, and then the normally stoic anchor added edit this. If you don't want to do it, Murray, it's okay. I'll come up and say goodbye anyhow. Later, Murray would grin mischievously and say, I'm getting to him. And he was. Coppell now referred to Murray as a friend. My old professor had even coaxed compassion out of the television business. For the interview, which took place on a Friday afternoon, Murray wore the same shirt he'd had on the day before. He changed shirts only every other day at this point, and this was not the other day. So why break routine? Unlike the previous two Coppell short sessions, this one was conducted entirely within Murray's study, where Murray had become a prisoner of his chair. Coppell, who kissed my old professor when he first saw him, now had to squeeze in alongside the bookcase in order to be seen in the camera's lens. Before they started, Coppell asked about the disease progression. How bad is it, Murray? Murray weakly lifted a hand halfway up his belly. This was as far as it could go. Coppell had his answer. The camera rolled. The third and final interview, Coppell asked if Murray was more afraid now that death was near. Murray said no. To tell the truth, he was less afraid. He said he was letting go of some of the outside world. To tell the truth, he was less afraid. He said he was letting go of some of the outside world, not having the newspaper read to him as much, not paying as much attention to mail, instead listening more to music and watching the leaves change color through his window. There were other people who suffered from ALS, Murray knew. Some of them famous, such as Stephen Hawking, the brilliant physicist and author of A Brief History of Time. He lived with a hole in his throat, spoke through a computer synthesizer, typed words by batting his eyes as a sensor picked up the movement. This was admirable, but it was not the way Murray wanted to live. He told Coppell he knew when it would be time to say goodbye. The brilliant physicist and author. He lived with a hole in his throat, spoke through a computer synthesizer. For me, that living means I can be responsive to the other person. It means I can show my emotions and my feelings, talk to them, feel with them. He exhaled. When that is gone, Murray's gone. They talked like friends, as he had in the previous two interviews. Coppell asked about the old ass wipe test, hoping, perhaps, for a humorous response, but Murray was too tired even to grin. He shook his head. When I sit on the commode, I can no longer sit up straight. I am listening all the time, so they have to hold me. When I'm done, they have to wipe me. That is how far it's gotten. He told Coppell he wanted to die with serenity. He shared his latest aphorism. Don't let go too soon, but don't hang on too long. Coppell nodded painfully. Only 6 months had passed between the first Nightline show and this one, but Murray Shorts was clearly a collapsed form. He had decayed before a national TV audience. A mini series of a death. But as his body rotted, his character shone even more brightly. Toward the end of the interview, the camera zoomed in on Murray Coppell. Coppell was not even in the picture, only his voice was heard from outside it. And the anchor asked if if my old professor had anything he wanted to say to the millions of people he had touched, although he didn't mean it this way. I couldn't help but think of a condemned man being asked for his final words. I couldn't help but think of a condemned man being asked for his final words. Be compassionate, Marie whispered, and take responsibility for each other. If we learned those lessons, this world would be so much better place. So much better a place. He took a breath, then added this mantra, love each other or die. The interview was ended, but for some reason the cameraman left the film rolling, and a final scene was caught on tape. The camera left the film rolling. You did a good job, Coppel said. Marie smiled weakly. I gave you what I had, he whispered. You always do, Ted. This disease is knocking at my spirit. But it'll not get my spirit. I'll get my body. It'll get my body. It'll not get my spirit. Coppel was near tears. You done good. You think so? Marie rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. I'm bargaining with him up there now. I'm asking him, do I get to be one of the angels? It was the first time Marie admitted talking to God. Coppel was near tears. You done good job. You think so? Marie rolled his eyes toward the ceiling. I'm bargaining with him up there now. I'm asking him, do I get to be one of the angels? The 12th Tuesday, we talk about forgiveness. 12th. Forgive yourself before you die. Then forgive others. This was a few days after the Nightline interview. The sky was rainy and dark, and Murray was beneath the blanket. I sat at the far end of his chair, holding his bare feet. They were closed and curled, and his toenails were yellow. I had a small jar of lotion, and I squeezed some into my hands and began to massage his ankles. It was another of the things I had watched his helpers do for months, and now in an attempt to hold on to what I could of him, I had volunteered to do it myself. The disease had left Murray without the ability even to wiggle his toes. Yet he could still feel pain, and messages helped relieve it. Also, of course, Murray liked being held and touched. And at this point, anything I could do to make him happy, I was gonna do. Mitch, she said, returning to the subject of forgiveness. There is no point in keeping vengeance or stubbornness. These things, he sighed. These things I so regret in my life: pride, vanity. Why do we do the things we do? The importance of forgiving was my question. I had seen those movies where the patriarch of the family is on his deathbed and he calls for his estranged son so that he can make peace before he goes. I wondered if he had any of that inside, a sudden need to say I'm sorry before he died. Murray nodded. Do you see that sculpture? He tilted his head toward the bust that sat high on a shelf against the far wall of his office. I had never really noticed it before. Cast in bronze, it was the face of a man in his early 40s, wearing a necktie, a tuft of hair falling across his forehead. That's me, Murray said. A friend of mine sculpted that maybe 30 years ago. His name was Norman. We used to spend so much time together. We went swimming. We took rides to New York. He had me over to his house in Cambridge, and he sculpted that of bust of me down in his basement. It took several weeks to do it, but he really wanted to get it right. I studied the face. How strange to see a three-dimension Murray, so healthy, so young, watching over us as we spoke. Even in bronze, he had a whimsical look. And I thought this friend had sculpted a little spirit as well. Well, here's the sad part of the story. Murray said Norman and his wife moved away to Chicago. A little while later, my wife Charlotte had to have a pretty serious operation. Norman and his wife never got in touch with us. I know they knew about it. Charlotte and I were very hurt because they never called to see how she was, so we dropped the relationship. Over the years, I met Norman a few times and he always tried to reconcile. But I didn't accept it. I wasn't satisfied with his explanation. I was prideful. I shrugged him off. His voice choked. Mitch, a few years ago, he died of cancer. I feel so sad. I never got to see him. I never got to forgive. It pains me now so much. He was crying again, a soft and quiet cry. And because his head was back, the tears rolled off the side of his face before they reached his lips. Sorry, I said. Don't be, he whispered. Tears are okay. I continued rubbing lotion into his lifeless toes. He wept for a few minutes, alone with his memories. It's not just the other people we need to forgive, Mitch. He finally whispered. We also need to forgive ourselves. Ourselves? Yes, for all the things we didn't do, all the things we should have done. You can't get stuck on the regrets of what should have happened. That doesn't help you when you get to where I am. I always wished I had done more with my work. I wished I had written more books. I used to beat myself up over it. Now I see that never did any good. Make peace. You need to make peace with yourself and everyone around you. I leaned over and dabbed at the tears with a tissue. Murray flicked his eyes open and closed. His breathing was audible, like a light snore. Forgive yourself, forgive others. Don't wait, Mitch. Not everyone gets the time I'm getting. Not everyone is as lucky. I tossed the tissue into the wastebasket and returned to his feet. Lucky? I pressed my thumb into his hardened flesh, and he didn't even feel it. Not everyone gets the time I'm getting. The tension of opposites. Mitch, remember that? Things pulling in different directions. Pulling in different directions. I remember. I mourn my dwindling time, but I cherish the chance it gives me to make things right. We sat there for a while, quietly, as the rain splattered against the windows. The hibiscus plant behind his head was still holding on, small but firm. Mitch, Murray whispered. I rolled his toes between my fingers, lost in the task. Look at me. I glanced up and saw the most intense look in his eyes. I don't know why you came back to me, but I want to say this. He paused and his voice choked. If I could have had another son, I would have liked it to be you. I dropped my eyes, kneading the dying flesh of his feet between my fingers for a moment. I felt afraid, as if accepting his words would somehow betray my own father, but when I looked up, I saw Murray smiling through tears, and I knew there was no betrayer in a moment like this. All I was afraid was saying goodbye. I've picked a place to be buried. Where is that? Not far from here, on a hill, beneath a tree, overlooking a pond, very serene, a good place to think. Are you planning on thinking there? Are you planning on thinking there? I'm planning on being that there. He chuckled. I chuckled. Will you visit? Visit? Just come and talk. Make it a Tuesday. You always come on Tuesdays. We are Tuesday people, right? Tuesday people come to talk. Then he has grown so weak so fast. Look at me, he says. I'm looking. You'll come to my grave to tell me your problems, my problems, yes. And you'll give me answers. I'll give you what I can. Don't I always? I picture his grave on the hill overlooking the pond, some little 9-foot piece of earth where they will place him, cover him with dirt, put a stone on the top. Put a stone on top. Maybe in a few weeks, maybe in a few days, I see myself sitting there alone, arms across my knees, staring into space. It won't be the same, I say, not being able to hear you talk. Talk. He closes his eyes and smiles. Tell you what? After I'm dead, you talk. I'll listen. The 13th Tuesday, we talk about the perfect day. Murray wanted to be cremated. He had discussed it with Charlotte, and they decided it was the best way. The Robbie from Brandy's, Al Exler, a longtime friend whom they chose to conduct the funeral service, had come to visit Murray, and Murray told him of his cremation plan. And oh, yes, make sure they don't overcook me. Robbie was stunned, but Murray was able to joke about his body now. Um, the closer closer he got to the end, the more he saw it as a mere shell, a container of the soul. It was withering to useless skin and bones anyhow, which made it easier to let go. We're we're so afraid of the sight of death, Murray told me when I sat down. I adjusted the microphone on its collar, but it kept flopping over. Murray coughed. He was coughing all the time now. I read a book the other day. It said that as soon as someone dies in a hospital, they pull the sheets up over their head and they wheel the body to some chute and push it down. They can't wait to get it out of their sight. People act as if that was contagious. I fumbled with the microphone. Murray glanced at my hands. It's not contagious, you know. Death is as natural as life. It's part of the deal we made. He coughed again, and I moved back and waited, always braced for something serious. Murray had been having bad nights lately, frightening nights. He could sleep only a few hours at a time before violent hacking spells woke him. The nurses would come into the bedroom, pound him on the back, try to bring up the poison. Even if they got him breathing normally again, normally meaning with the help of the oxygen machine, the fight left him fatigued the whole next day. The oxygen tube was up his nose now. I hated the sight of it. To me, it symbolized helplessness. I wanted to pull it out. Last night, Murray said softly. Yeah, last night? I had a terrible spell. It went on for hours, and I really wasn't sure I was gonna make it. No breath, no end to the choking. At one point, I started to get dizzy, and then I felt a certain peace. I felt that I was ready to go. His eyes widened. Mitch, it was the most incredible feelings. The sensation of accepting what was happening, being at peace. I was thinking about a dream I had last week, where I was crossing a bridge into something unknown, being ready to move on to whatever is next, but you didn't. Murray waited a moment. He shook his head slightly. No, I didn't, but I felt that I could. Do you understand? That's what we're looking for. A certain peace with the idea of dying. If we know in the end that we can ultimately have that peace with dying, then we can finally do the real hard thing, which is make peace with living. He asked to see. He asked to. He asked to see the hibiscus plant on the ledge behind him. I cupped it in my hand and held it up near his eyes. He smiled. It's natural to die, he said again. The fact that we make such a big hullabaloo over it is all because we don't see ourselves as part of nature. We think because we are human, we are something above nature. He smiled at the plant. You're not. Everything that gets born dies. He looked at me. Do you accept that? Yes, all right, he whispered. Now here's the payoff. Here is how we are different from these wonderful plants and animals. As long as we can love each other and remember the feelings of love we had, we can die without ever really going away. All the love you created is still there. All the memories are still there. You live on in the hearts of everyone you have touched and nurtured while you were here. His voice was raspy, which usually meant he needed to stop for a while. I placed the plant back on the ledge and went to shut off the tape recorder. This is the last sentence Murray got out before I did. Death ends a life, not a relationship.